And it's appropriate that on davidicke.com today, before this all this stuff started, I presume, as I look through it, there is an article written for davidicke.com by John Whitehead. John Whitehead is a long time campaigner for justice and freedom, and a man with the balance to see the game for what it is. And the headline of his article is "What to Expect in 2021, Madness, Mayhem, Manipulation and More Tyranny," which is even more certain. It was certain before, but it's even more certain now. And he starts the article with a quote from George Orwell and his book, Animal Farm. 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the face of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But it was already impossible to say which was which. And he says in his article, "So far it looks like this year is going to be plagued by more of the same brand of madness, mayhem, manipulation and tyranny that dominated 2020. Actually, it's meant to be even more severe. Frankly," he says, "I'm sick of it. The hypocrisy, the double standards, the delusional belief by Americans at every point along the political spectrum that politics and politicians are the answer to what ails the country. When for most of our nation's history, politics and politicians have been the cause of our woes. Consider for years now, Americans, with sheep-like placidity, have tolerated all manner of injustices and abuses meted out among them and upon them by the government. Police shootings of unarmed individuals, brutality, corruption, graft, outright theft, occupations and invasions of their homes by militarized police, roadside strip searches, profit-driven incarcerations, profit-driven wars, egregious surveillance, taxation without any real representation, a nanny state that dictates every aspect of their lives, lockdowns, over-criminalization, etc. Without ever saying, enough is enough. Only now," he says, "do Americans seem righteously indignant enough to mobilize and get active. And for what purpose? Politics. They're ready to go to the mat over which corporate puppet will get the honor to serve as the smiling face on the pig for the next 4 years. Talk about delusion." How right that is. What's the answer? Change the politicians. Well, that's worked, isn't it? How do we get into this mess? Because the population acquiesced to it. He goes on, a perfect example of how farcical, topsy-turvy and downright perverse life has become in the America. While President Trump doles out medals of commendation and presidential pardons to political cronies, we have done little to nothing to advance the cause of freedom. Julian Assange rots in prison for daring to blow the whistle on the US government's war crimes. You'd think that Americans would be outraged over such abject pandering to the very swamp that Trump pledged to drain. But that's not what the right and the left have got so worked up about. No, they're still arguing over whether dead men voted in the last presidential election. Either way, no matter which candidate lost to the other, it was always going to be the deep state that won. And so you have it. Reduced to technicalities, distracted by magicians' con games, and caught up in the manufactured, highly scripted contest over which beauty contestant wears the crown, we have failed to do anything about the world falling apart around us, literally. Our economy, at least as it impacts the vast majority of Americans, as opposed to the economic elite, is in shambles. Our infrastructure is falling apart. Our government has been overtaken by power-hungry predators and parasites. And this is the same in every other country, including Britain. And our ability and fundamental right to govern our lives, our own lives, is being usurped by greedy government operatives who care nothing for our lives or our freedoms. Our ship of state is being transformed into a ship of fools. We stand utterly defenseless in the face of a technological revolution brought about by artificial intelligence and wall-to-wall surveillance that is reorientating the world as we know it. Despite the mounting high-tech encroachments on our rights, we have been afforded a paltry amount of legislative and judicial protections. Indeed, corporate America has more rights than we do. And that's been achieved by control of the very politicians, this is me speaking now, that people think changing the guard will make any difference. We stand utterly powerless, Whitehead says, in the face of government bureaucrats and elected officials who dance to the tune of corporate overlords and do what they want when they want with whomever they want at taxpayer expense, with no thought or concern for the plight of those who are supposed to represent. To this power elite, we, the people, are good for only two things: our tax dollars and our votes. In other words, they just want our money. And I would say they want far more than that. They want total and utter control of the minds of the entire global population. We stand utterly helpless, he says, in the face of government violence that is meted out both at home and abroad. Indeed, the systematic violence being perpetrated by the agents of government, inflicted on unharmed individuals by battlefield-trained SWAT teams, militarized police and bureaucratic government agents, trained to shoot first and ask questions later, has done more collective harm to the American people and their liberties than any single act of terror or mass shooting. And they are the very people now condemning violence as if they hold the moral high ground. That comment was from me. We stand utterly silenced, says Whitehead, in the face of government and corporate censors and a cancel culture that, in their quest not to offend certain viewpoints, are all too willing to eradicate views that do not conform. In this way, political correctness has given way to a more insidious form of groupthink and mob rule, always intended to. We stand utterly locked down in the face of COVID-19 mandates, restrictions, travel bans and penalties that are acclimating the populace to unquestioningly accede to the government's diktats, whatever they might be, as long as they are used in the name of national security, no matter how extreme or unreasonable. We stand utterly intimidated in the face of red flag laws, terrorism watch lists, contract tracing programs, zero tolerance policies, and all other manner of police state tactics that aim to keep us fearful and compliant. We stand utterly indoctrinated in the collective belief that the government, despite its long-planned or long-standing pattern and practice of corruption, collusion, dysfunction, immorality, and incompetence, somehow represents we the people. Despite all this, despite how evident it is we are mere tools to be used and abused and manipulated for the power elite's own diabolical purposes, we somehow fail to see their machinations for what they truly are: thinly veiled attempts to overthrow our republic and enslave the citizenry in order to expand their power and wealth. It is a grim outlook for the new year, says Whitehead, but it is not completely hopeless. And what makes it not completely hopeless is the fact still that if enough people cease to cooperate with their enslavement can still be mitigated and rolled back. But as I said in my public videocast last week, if the cult gets everything it wants in 2021 because of lack of pushback, then it's going to be very, very difficult to turn this around. But I tell you now, I will die at some point still trying.